places, everyone. Theatrical expression. Good afternoon, everyone. After 2 years in office, we're seeing the results of our disciplined fiscal stewardship, our strategic vision for New York City, and all we've done to support the success and hard work of New Yorkers. Our fiscal year 2017 preliminary budget is $82.1 billion. It is a responsible budget on two levels. First, it addresses the needs of New Yorkers through targeted investments. Second, it protects our fiscal health for the future through reserves that will help insulate us against uncertainty. Today, we see that this approach is strengthening us. The city is in good fiscal health, our local economy is growing, and New York City is economically outpacing many other parts of the United States. Yet, despite our discipline, we face some major challenges that didn't exist last time I spoke to you about our budget. We're also watching a global and national economic landscape that looks increasingly uncertain. And it's a landscape that continues to show chasms between those with wealth and those working to just get by. The most recent evidence of this, and I'm putting this up front because I think it shocked people all over the country, all over the world, is the Oxfam report released just days ago that found the richest 62 people. And I want to refer to it here. This indicates individual people. 62 people have more wealth than 3.5 billion residents of this earth. And I've talked about income inequality with all of you for 3 years straight now. I don't think I've seen a more sobering statistic or a more sobering illustration than this one. And it's an issue we're all going to have to work very hard to address. The report also finds, by the way, that, quote, the richest 1% have now accumulated more wealth than the rest of the world put together. The richest 1% of the Earth's population have more wealth than the rest of the world put together. So let me now describe to you our budget, describe the economic backdrop that we're dealing with, and then, of course, we'll be taking questions about the budget up ahead. I want to thank all those up front who contributed to putting together this document. Of course, our first Deputy Mayor, Tony Shorus, Deputy Mayor Richard Bury, Deputy Mayor Alicia Glenn. I want to thank our OMB Director, Dean Fullahan. Dean put an immense amount of time and energy into this with his extraordinary team at OMB. And our Director for the Office of Labor Relations, Bob Lynn. I want to thank everyone. They did a great job putting together this plan. So let's begin by looking at the economic picture across the 5 boroughs. You'll remember 3 years ago I talked about the need to focus on a real 5-borough economy. And this is something that's going to be very important in all we do. Our local economy is strong, and it's driven by our greatest resource, the guts, the smarts, the innovation, the hard work of almost 8.5 million people. We're experiencing extraordinary employment growth. In fact, we have some breaking news. There's a couple of pieces of breaking news today. Here is one of the pieces of breaking news. We're very proud of it. Data released by the State Department of Labor just a couple hours ago shows that we have set a new all-time high for jobs in New York City. So, for a long time, this had been the high back in 1969. We surpassed that in recent years, but now we are over 4.2 million jobs. This is the most jobs New York City has ever had in its entire history, and we intend for that number to keep growing. In the past 2 years, we have added over 220,000 jobs. Now, we've talked about this number in recent months. It keeps growing. It's a nice thing to be able to constantly update you with a new number. 220,000 jobs. This is the highest 2-year gain ever. So again, I want you to look at this. This is different 2-year periods, some with gains, some with losses. This 2 years, from the end of 13, beginning of 14, the 2 years we've been here, 14 and 15, the highest job growth in 2 years in the history of the city. And as I said, our goal is a 5-borough economy. So this is an interesting slide. 2007 marks the end of the last expansion. In 2007, that year, we had some job growth, but you'll note that of course, a lot in Manhattan, very poor in the Bronx. Now, fast forward to 2014, job growth even stronger in the outer boroughs across the board. Great results in Brooklyn, strong results in Queens. Look at the difference in the Bronx from almost no growth in the last strong year we had, 2007. Now, real serious growth, 3.4% growth in 2014. So this is one of many indicators, but this suggests some real progress towards a true five-borough economy and opportunity that reaches more deeply into our neighborhoods. There's also good news on wages, real wages. That is, wages adjusted for inflation went up significantly in 2014. So this represents the annual rate, the average rate across the years 2007 to 2013. Obviously, wages kept going down in real terms. 2014, we see growth. I have to note that the growth still has not caught us up to the pre-recession level, but it is still substantial. Now, another big issue, and I'll always give credit where credit's due. My predecessor focused a lot on a more diverse economy. We've built upon those efforts and deepened those efforts. So I'm very proud to say, not only is our economy is not only growing, it is more diverse. It is less reliant on Wall Street and the financial sector. We saw 10% job growth in the tech sector. And that is, let's point this out here, this is really amazing. So here's finance and insurance. It's fairly steady. Obviously, this was the backbone for many years. Look at comparatively the extraordinary growth in tech. Direct jobs, 113,000, but the tech ecosystem is broadly regarded as being over 300,000 jobs now. And this one has tremendous growth potential. We're very proud of what our tech community is doing. We're working very closely to build that community, and we see a lot of pull of talent and companies towards New York City from all over the country and all over the world. Other growth sectors include leisure and hospitality, healthcare, and professional and business services. So those are some of the economic measures. In terms of non-economic measures, we see some real strong momentum as well. First of all, another piece of breaking news today announced that we have set a new all-time high for visitors to our city, for our tourism sector. And this has been, as you can see, 6 consecutive years of growth in tourism. This new number, 58.3 million, is astounding. It's a jump of almost 2 million tourists since last year. So this is a sector that continues to grow. We have high hopes for its continued growth. I have noted in the past this is a sector that we appreciate deeply. We need to do a better job of getting higher wage and higher benefit jobs in that sector, but obviously it still provides a lot to our economy. And population, New York City's population, I have to say this is, I think, a statistic that most people probably wouldn't gather in its totality just from the experience they've had, but we have increased our population by almost 500,000 between the year this, by far the largest population increase of any country, any city in the country. So here's some of the 25 largest cities, some of the ones at 14, meaning our population was hovering just above 8 million at the beginning of 2000. We are now very close to 8.5 million movement, up or down, by far more population growth than any city in the country. That's continuing. Begs a very interesting question. When will we get to 9 million people? You'll remember the Bloomberg administration originally in Plan NYC thought that would be 2040. I think we can safely say it's going to be a lot sooner. And that's both a wonderful blessing for the city, but also will create a lot of challenges that we have to address, particularly in terms of infrastructure. But unquestionably, it is a vote of confidence in New York City that so many people want to be here, so many businesses want to be here. So look, it's clear that we have a lot of good news. Here in this city, unlike many other parts of the country, we can see some elements of the recovery that are actually real and tangible, but we know that this recovery has not lived up to the name on many levels here and elsewhere, particularly in terms of wages. And so we come back to something I've talked about before, and this is the essence of so much of what we're working on. Too many hardworking New Yorkers are struggling. Even as we have economic growth, too many people are struggling to make ends meet. We talked about the eventual wage growth that we saw in 2014, but it took a long time. and we still haven't caught up to our pre-recession peak. And who's been benefiting from the wage growth? So here you have the top 20%. That's where the greatest benefit has been, and the next 20% as well. Here in the bottom 20%, almost no, and the 20 to 40, almost no improvement. So again, the skew is not being addressed sufficiently. And this, I remind you, this is affecting a lot of people who are doing everything the right way. They're working hard. They're creating jobs in many cases with our small businesses. They're innovating. They're doing everything they should do, but it's still very hard to make ends meet. So that is what's happening in an economy that any city in the country, any city in the world would love to have. It's diverse, it's strong. This is how things look today in relatively good times. You'll hear in this presentation why we're concerned what would happen if the economic storm clouds that we see nationally and globally led to a downturn, and we have to be very cognizant of that danger. World stock markets have lost trillions of dollars since the first of this year, so just in the last couple of weeks. We've seen slow or negative growth in many of the world's economies. Nowhere is that more clear than in China. This is the Chinese stock market since the summer. We see a very, very precipitous drop, and that's been one of the greatest destabilizing factors. Obviously, we're deeply concerned about the effect of terrorism, both in human terms and what it's doing to economic confidence. There's a lot of real challenges here that are coming together at the same time to make us unsettled as to what our economic future is. And that top point there, how many of the countries that have been bellwethers of growth are now slowing precipitously. Again, look at our own economy, U.S. economy in many ways outperforming other developed countries, but we've seen some real declines lately in terms of retail sales, industrial production, and we see relatively slow business spending. So uneven dynamics that cause us pause. Now, as New Yorkers, we know way too much about what happens when things go wrong. We saw how suddenly the economy could turn and what the impact was on all of us, and the fact that the turns can happen essentially without warning. That happened obviously after 9/11. We woke up in the morning and our world had changed by nightfall. It also happened in many ways with the Great Recession of 2008. I talked to all of you about the Big Short the other day, or some of you are in the room. It is troubling but important to remember just how suddenly that recession hit and what the assumptions were before. So this slide will help us to understand that. This is from January 2008, right as the recession was actually gathering steam, but it had not yet been acknowledged. It had not yet been identified. So the blue chip consensus represents top economic forecasters. It's a composite of the views of economic forecasters, leaders in the field, in the private sector. And this consensus in January 2008 suggested growth, the total growth in the GDP in dollar terms was projected to be $738 billion. Solid growth for 2008, even more growth for 2009. This was what the leading economic thinkers thought in January 2008. What they did not know was the recession had already begun. This is what actually happened. We went in the wrong direction in 2008. We went sharply in the wrong direction in 2009. So this is one of the times where I'll come back to one of my mantras that we as New York City have to protect ourselves. In this kind of scenario, we will only have ourselves to depend on. In this kind of scenario, the federal government takes a hit in terms of revenue, state government takes a hit in terms of revenue, and a lot of dominoes start to fall in a very bad way, which means we must be prepared. So here's the examples of what happens. City revenues plummet. Obviously, tax revenues don't come in the way we were expecting. People are hurting. They're losing jobs. They're going through all sorts of distress, so there's more demand for city services. Federal and state aid starts to dry up quickly. Then we're left with a choice. Are we going to cut city services? Are we going to raise taxes? Or are we going to do both? That's what happens in these scenarios. And that's why we have built this budget on the assumption that we have to be ready for a scenario where we would go it alone. Which brings us to our reserves. We have kept our reserves at unprecedented levels. And this, you'll remember, is exactly where we left the adopted budget in June. So that is a full year's worth of the Retirees Health Benefits Trust Fund, $1 billion in the General Reserve, $500 million in what we created last year for the first time, the Capital Stabilization Reserve, to protect our capital investments and ensure we can make our debt service payments. We're keeping that high-level reserve intact. We think we need it now more than ever. These are very substantial reserves. Again, I think any city in the country would love to have that kind of reserve level, but they're not infinite. And I want to go back to the example I gave just to give this perspective. So I mentioned the blue chip consensus, what they thought would happen. Again, they thought GDP would grow by $738 billion. In fact, GDP went down by $455 billion, basically $500 billion. Millions of families were sent tumbling down the economic ladder. And the city was hit immediately by this starting in 2008. What did it mean for us? We had to employ over 2 years' time $7 billion worth of reserves, raise taxes more than $2 billion, cut $3.5 billion in city services, all told a $12.5 billion impact over 2 years. Now, that was the Great Recession. Let's just give this a little perspective, the second worst economic crisis of the last century. Other recessions have been somewhat more moderate. But to give you one example of how quickly things can turn and what it means in real, tangible terms, that's what happened. And that's what we need to guard against with strong reserves. And we know reserves are one part of the bigger puzzle. We also have to be fiscally disciplined on many other levels. We have to manage risk and uncertainty. And one of the key things we did, probably one of the most foundational things we did in the last 2 years, was addressing the outstanding labor contracts. We are now, and I give Bob Lynn tremendous credit and his team, 94% of our workforce under contract. On this day 2 years ago, it was 0. That's one of the most important elements of discipline and reliability that has been achieved. We're carefully managing our out-year gaps. We'll look at those later on. We're finding savings across the government. Now, we're starting here with agency savings and debt savings. That will save us over $1 billion in fiscal 16 and 17. We're certainly going to be talking about savings a lot more in the executive budget because there's more we have to do. And this is on top of the healthcare savings. Again, one of the most fundamental things that we started in 2014 was to really start to fundamentally address healthcare savings, one of the areas that needed the most work. We hit our fiscal 15 healthcare savings target of $400 million. We're on track to hit our fiscal 16 target of $700 million. We will meet the goal that we identified when we struck our labor deals. We will see a guaranteed savings of $3.4 billion through fiscal 18, and then $1.3 billion in savings every year thereafter, and we think there's an opportunity to go even farther in healthcare savings. So one part of the picture is reserves, one part of the picture is the right kind of labor deals that are responsible and offer us more reliable dynamics in our budget. One part of it is finding savings across the board. One part of it is healthcare savings, one of the areas that most needed attention and offers the greatest possibility for finding real money. But at the same time, we know that we have to make targeted investments because we're looking at the question of what builds a long-term economically strong city. What makes us economically viable for the long term? What allows us to keep growing? Clearly, that is not only what we're committed to in terms of people having opportunity and families being able to do well, but that also helps to guarantee our revenue possibilities for the future. So we have an investment-oriented worldview, and we put investments in large measure into the areas that we believe will lead to economic growth in the future. Areas like public safety, areas like education, and certainly infrastructure. These, I think, define what a a productive and economically viable city looks like. Safe streets, a well-educated workforce, a workforce ready for 21st century jobs, available transportation, stronger infrastructure. So we've talked about the philosophy we're bringing. We've identified a host of global trends that give us pause. We know we have to be ready for any number of scenarios. But we also have some immediate challenges, again, which are different than some of those we confronted in the past and are much more local or in some cases related to the state. So let's talk about the state for a moment first. The state budget that was proposed last week certainly included some very positive news. We're very, very pleased that the governor included in his vision a major commitment for supportive housing, the $15 minimum wage for the city and state, paid family leave. These are all areas that are very important to the people in New York City, big steps forward. We have to work hard to achieve them, and there's going to obviously be a fight over some of these in Albany. But I commend the governor for putting them in his vision, and we're going to work hard to see those through to fruition. Now, at the same time, as we've talked about, we were surprised to see cuts of nearly $1 billion for the next fiscal year. That would have had a very negative impact on the city. The initially proposed cuts included $485 million from CUNY for fiscal 17, $209 million in state Medicaid payments in 2017, but that figure was going to grow consistently, and that Medicaid figure was going to go up over $1 billion by fiscal 21 or so. I was pleased when the governor clarified the following day that those proposals would instead be submitted to a collaborative process between the city and the state to identify reforms and efficiencies, a process we are happy to engage in. And the governor, it's obviously been well reported, said that these proposals would, quote, not cost the city a penny. And I will certainly hold him to that. But we are happy to work with the governor and happy to work with the legislature on reform ideas related to CUNY and Medicaid. That's certainly something we're going to engage energetically and work together looking forward to the budget in April. Now, there's other issues in the state budget. I'm going to reserve comment on some other areas until my budget presentation in Albany on Tuesday, so more to come on that. The next more local factor I want to identify, and this is one that has emerged only recently, is we have a major new obligation related to our city pension system. As part of the regular review process, the city actuary is charged with updating our assumptions, and the actuary has made a decision to adjust assumptions. This will increase the city's pension cost by $600 million annually. This is not an announcement I enjoy making, but it is a necessary one. $600 million annually, that includes in the current fiscal year. So immediately we had to find in this budget $600 million for the current fiscal year, $600 million for the next fiscal year, 17, and for every year thereafter. The adjustment is reflected to something that is a good thing in our city, in our society, the increased longevity of our employees and retirees. And this is happening all over the country, obviously. Pension systems are having to recalculate. It is necessary to do. It is the mature thing to do, but it comes obviously with serious ramifications. And on top of the extra $600 million, we experienced lower earnings on pension investments for 2015. This was outlined in a report put out by the Comptroller's Office in November. So our responsibility is not only to cover the new pension adjustment, but to add an additional $73 million for this fiscal year, which will grow to $300 million by fiscal 20 to make up for the gap in underperforming investments. Everyone's seen what happened in the stock markets recently, and this is something, unfortunately, that we had to compensate for. What does this mean in total? We are going to be able to meet all our obligations to our pension system for fiscal 17. It will take a $9.4 billion commitment. That is a very high number, but it's what's necessary. If there is a ray of light or optimism, is the fact that we are continuing with the plan initiated previously to get to 100% funding of our pension systems. Now, this is going to take us all the way to fiscal 32. But if we continue to make the investments now, by fiscal 32, New York City pension systems will be fully funded. That will give us a lot of security going forward, ultimately should allow us to reduce our budget exposure related to pension systems. And by the way, in terms of our long-term fiscal health, our ability to maintain our obligations to our employees and our retirees, fully funding the pension system is an absolutely essential thing to do. Now, let me take a moment to do a little compare and contrast, because there are places that chose not to fully fund their systems. There are some cities and states that have not done this the right way. Let's look across the river at New Jersey, which has seen its ratings cut a record 9 times by all 3 major rating agencies since 2010. Literally 9 different times. You can see the ratings going down, 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 down from the leading rating agencies. You can do your research and see how that correlates to leadership patterns in New Jersey over the same time frame. Now, let's talk about another area where we're confronting major new challenges. And again, this is something that has emerged, especially in the last year, as something that we have to address much more intensely than we did before. And that is our public health system. New York City Health and Hospitals, by far the largest municipal health system in the country. 2014, our 11 hospitals, 70-plus community-based clinics, and all other facilities were visited nearly 5 million times. Almost 1 in 6 New Yorkers were treated by our public hospitals. And not only do these hospitals provide essential care to so many of our fellow New Yorkers, New York City Health and Hospitals was right at the front line of the Ebola crisis. I remind you, it was an extraordinarily difficult and dramatic moment. Bellevue Hospital and HHC stepped up, handled something the city had literally never had to deal with before, did it brilliantly. The entire nation admired how our public hospitals handled Ebola. I give a lot of credit to Dr. Raju, who's with us today, and his team for how they handled that, and many other challenges. But they have a new challenge that in many ways is greater than before, and we want to try and give you a little background on this. By and large, patients who go to health and hospitals are covered by Medicaid or are entirely uninsured. And there's been a lot of talk lately about what's happened with healthcare reform. Healthcare reform has been a stunning example of progress in this country. President Obama deserves immense credit. But as we've noted, there are still close to 30 million Americans who are uninsured. And obviously, folks who are undocumented by definition are uninsured. Well, that's a challenge to begin with. The federal government is cutting reimbursements for the care of uninsured patients. And Medicaid, even when it is available, doesn't cover the entire cost of care. So that leaves health and hospitals having to deal with an ever more complicated situation. And we've identified 3 areas in particular where, on top of that larger phenomenon, there have been changes, especially in the last year. Federal charity care dollars for uninsured have declined. Patients who have mental health issues now moved into managed care. That's based on some of the state Medicaid reforms, which again, in many ways have been meritorious, but this has been an unintended consequence. So here's a federal policy that led to some changes, I think, beyond that which was anticipated, a state policy. And then here's a very interesting and surprising phenomenon. As the healthcare economic picture has changed, we now have many more Medicaid patients not going to our public hospitals, going to our voluntary hospitals. Intense increase in the pickup rate of voluntary hospitals taking on those patients, leaving HHC with even fewer customers who come in with the ability to pay. Health and Hospitals is going to have to transform its operating model intensely because the current situation is not sustainable. Dr. Raju has already put a number of reforms in place that have started this process. We will be updating you with a new plan for stabilizing the long-term health of health and hospitals. We'll do that in anticipation of the executive budget in the spring. But in the meantime, we have to provide an immediate infusion of resources to continue the work Health and Hospitals does serving so many New Yorkers. So we're adding $337 million to this budget to cover immediate challenges. There is a parallel here. We went through a process last year with the Housing Authority. New York City Housing Authority obviously had been in financial decline for many years. Less precipitously than what's happened to Health and Hospitals in the last year or two. But we went through a thorough restructuring process. We came up with the next generation NYCHA plan. We're going to do something even bigger because HHC has even bigger challenges. We'll do that with HHC over the next 2 months. In terms of developing this plan, Dr. Raju obviously will be leading the way, working closely with our first Deputy Mayor, Tony Shores, and our new Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services, Dr. Herminia Blasio. So those are the challenges. They are, again, different than the ones you heard a year ago or 2 years ago. Certainly more complex in terms of the global context. That being said, having resolved the labor contracts by and large, having laid in strong reserves, having found additional savings, we are still confident that we can make some key investments, and in fact, we strategically must make some key investments. And the goal has always been to create one city rising together. That has always been the concept of what we're doing, to really create widespread opportunity, to make sure people in every neighborhood get to experience all that's great about this city. And these investments point us in that direction. Just a quick recap on what we did before to set the stage. Obviously, by the end of the year, with the help of the City Council, we will increase effective patrol strength of the NYPD by 2,000 officers between new officers and civilianization efforts. Our plan for 200,000 affordable apartments is actually ahead of schedule as of the numbers we announced recently. We have over 68,000 kids in full-day free pre-K. That number will, I think, be strong, maybe even grow in future years. We've launched the nation's most comprehensive local mental health plan, and as you know, we have a very aggressive new effort to tackle homelessness. So on top of those investments from the past, we're now going to add some new ones, all focused on the core mission of fighting inequality and creating opportunity. And we talked about this in our foundational document, which is the One NYC plan. And I'd urge everyone, if you haven't had a chance to stop and really look at it, it really explains the long-term vision, not only over the next few years, but over decades. One of the most important commitments we made in the One NYC plan was to help 800,000 New Yorkers who are at or near the poverty level to reach an economically sustainable level. That's almost 1 in 10 New Yorkers. And we believe that can be done. The first and most important element of that strategy is to raise the minimum wage. And look, despite all the ups and downs of the political process, we are closer to a $15 minimum wage today than we have ever been. And we're going to fight intensely to achieve the $15 minimum wage for this city in the coming months in Albany. In the meantime, we're acting on our own. We've created a $15 minimum wage for every city employee and for our contracted workers in the human services field. That is 50,000 more New Yorkers who will be guaranteed a $15 minimum wage. Tens of thousands more family members will benefit as a result of that. We're going to focus on the long-term investments that will make this city stronger for the future. None more important than education, and our equity and excellence agenda for our schools is the foundational concept. I've said that getting our second graders and third graders to reading level, to the appropriate reading level, on time, may be one of the most essential things we can do for the future of this city, because if they reach the appropriate reading level by third grade, their future prospects are much, much greater. So we'll provide 400 literacy coaches, ramping up to fiscal 19. This will ensure more than 78,000 second graders will have the support they need to get to reading at grade level. We are going to, as part of Equity and Excellence, initiate something that's never been done in New York City public schools. Every middle school student in the time they're in middle school, every high school student in the time they're in high school will visit a college campus. It will be an organized effort. It will reach 147,000 students each year. And it will help all of our young people to know that their futures can be bright and to show them a positive pathway. And big initiatives that will uplift our schools and certainly point all of our young people towards college and career. Algebra for all in middle school, advanced placement classes for all at high school level, for every high school. And the one I think unites so many of the pieces, computer science for all, which has had tremendous reception from parents and students and teachers alike. This will be integrated over the next few years in our school system. Every grade level will have computer science education integrated into its overall curriculum. Now, a very fair question would be, while we're making all these investments, where are we going to have the room we need for so many of our young people, particularly in our overcrowded districts? Today, there'll be a plan released by the School Construction Authority and the Department of Education, amending the current 5-year capital plan. We will now invest an additional $868 million to add 11,800 new school seats to relieve overcrowding. That's over the life of this plan, which is over the next 3 or 4 years. When combined with the 32,629 seats that we had already committed to in previous budgets, this will now bring our total to over 44,000 new school seats, again, over the next 3 years or so. 44,000 new school seats. And we will be introducing a capital plan for the following 5 years, which will begin in fiscal 20. That will add 38,000 seats on top of that. So the two plans combined, again, this will take us a number of years in the future, but the two plans combined will get us to 82,000 seats. Now, again, nothing is more important to our people, nothing is more important to our future, nothing is more important to our economy than public safety. And this is an area where there's literally no major city in the country that can compete with us. New York City continues to be clearly the safest large city in America. Men and women of the NYPD deserve tremendous credit because they continue to drive down crime and they continue to draw police and community closer together. And so we're going to continue our efforts and investments for the safety of our communities and the safety of our officers. NYC Safe. This is a very important initiative. It got some attention, but I think deserves a lot more. We're going to be systematically identifying those individuals in this city who have confirmed mental illness problems, who have a history of confirmed violence, and yet are not getting mental health treatment or not in the criminal justice system, who should be in one form or another addressed and supported. This NYC Safe plan will be the first time that this problem has ever been looked square in the face. For too many years, we've had folks with mental illness problems and violence, a history of violence, who needed treatment and nothing was done to confirm that they were getting it, nothing was done to provide it in any meaningful way. This new initiative will allow us to break through and actually address this problem. We're going to be expanding something that's been working very impressively already, the ShotSpotter gunshot detection system. We'll be introducing it into other precincts where the need is greatest. We will be continuing major investments to change and end the culture of violence at Rikers Island. A lot of those will focus on new training and technology. And we will be adding 15 new FDNY ambulance tours to help us protect the lives of all New Yorkers. They'll be focused on the Bronx, Western Queens, and Northern Manhattan. We also are deeply concerned about the safety of New Yorkers as they move around the city, and we want to make it easier to get around the city. So, of course, first of all, Vision Zero. Vision Zero is focused on the 3 E's, engineering, enforcement, and education. We'll put $115 million in capital funds to build bike paths and safe pedestrian spaces in areas that need them. It's part of a total capital investment of $128 million, which will also fund red light cameras across the city. Now, that is essential to our safety efforts, and you've seen the results of Vision Zero after year 2 continue to be strong and continue to make progress. But I do hear from so many of my constituents about their concerns about congestion. And congestion is about our ability to get around and the time it takes, and obviously there's safety ramifications as well. So to address the serious quality of life issue that congestion is, we're adding in this budget, and this is breaking news, it was not rolled in, as we say in modern parlance. This is actually news you are hearing for the first time. We are adding 327 new traffic enforcement agents who will help us improve the flow of traffic, and again, they'll increase safety at the same time. We're also going to make sure that our buses that serve hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers can do so more quickly, more reliably. We'll add 100 bus lane cameras along 10 routes to speed those buses along. And we're very concerned about waterborne transit as well. We're looking forward very much to next year with our citywide ferry plan. Very proud of the fact that we brought 24-hour ferry service to Staten Island, and that we've previously funded 2 new ferry vessels for Staten Island. Now we will be funding a 3rd. So the 3 oldest boats in the fleet will be replaced by new ones. We are also focused on continuing our efforts to address the real concerns and real problems of so many New Yorkers who are dealing with issues like mental health challenges, and certainly we're focused on tackling the challenge of homelessness. In the area of mental health, again, this is an area that got not only was stigmatized, but in many ways ignored for too many decades. There was not a comprehensive plan. For the first time, we have one as a city. It's called Thrive NYC. It's the first truly comprehensive plan to help all New Yorkers get the mental health support they need. It is funded in the fiscal 17 budget. This includes the new New York City Mental Health Corps. This will be over 400 clinicians that we will add to the supply of mental health professionals in this city. They'll serve all over the city. And the Mental Health First Aid Initiative. This one's so important. We're going to train 250,000 New Yorkers to immediately recognize and respond to mental health challenges, just as we would with physical health challenges via first aid. In terms of addressing homelessness, we will use every tool and every resource we have. Some of the key items that we have announced are Shelter Repair Squad 2.0, which is going to speed up the repair process and make it more transparent. Our in-shelter programming, this is very important. There's been a real and valid concern about why previous policy forced homeless people out of shelters during the day. They were allowed to come at night, but they were often pushed out of shelter in the day. We stopped that policy. We said anyone who's in a shelter and does not have a place to go, such as a job or school, whatever it may be, we're going to, of course, allow them to stay in shelter during the day. But more importantly, we're going to add training and supports that are going to help people on their pathway back to self-sufficiency. So there'll be adult literacy programs, there'll be job training programs, internships, a number of efforts to help get people back on their feet, and those will be provided in the shelter facilities. And finally, home base. This has been a real bright spot. 91,000 New Yorkers have been served by home base. A substantial number of them were people potentially headed to our shelter system. If their economic issues weren't addressed, the home base initiative got to them in time, was able to give them the help to stay in their apartments. About to conclude, but just want to take a moment to say so much of what we've done has been with the partnership of the City Council. It's been a very, very productive partnership. I want to thank Speaker Melissa Mark-Viverito. I want to thank the Chair of the Finance Committee, Julissa Ferreras-Copeland, the entire council. I met with council members just before this gathering, and there is a fantastic atmosphere of partnership. Obviously, we'd like to see that in government all over the country. Well, we have it here. People are really working together on these issues. We've heard some of the key concerns the council had. We've integrated some of those into the preliminary budget. We'll certainly be talking to them about a number of other issues leading up to the executive budget. But in this budget, you will find substantial investments in park enforcement patrols. That'll increase those patrols by about 30%. And obviously, our commitment to ending the AIDS epidemic by 2020, major investment in that area as well. Plus investments in some other key initiatives and priorities of the council, including the fight against K2 and the fight against elder abuse. So Quick conclusion, a couple words in Spanish, and then I'd like to turn to Dean Fullahan to give you a few more facts. Then we'll open up for questions on the budget. And my conclusion is simple. This budget builds on the successes and we've experienced so far, reaffirms our commitment to fiscal discipline, and meets challenges head on. We think it is much healthier for the city to acknowledge some of the challenges we face and go right at them, and that is the best way to secure the future of the city and secure the future of our fiscal health as well. En español. Después de 2 años en la alcaldía, estamos viendo los resultados de nuestro gobierno progresista, honesto y responsable. La economía local está creciendo y nuestra situación fiscal es sólida, con reservas para proteger servicios municipales esenciales. Sin embargo, enfrentamos posibles problemas por el presupuesto estatal, la economía mundial y nuevas obligaciones en el costo de nuestros hospitales y pensiones. Este presupuesto extiende nuestros logros, reafirmando nuestro sentido de responsabilidad y nuestro deber de enfrentar los problemas de la ciudad. In any language, he is a fine budget director, and we welcome Dean Fullahan. Well done.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be very brief, and I'll just go over some of the technical slides in the back. So let's go to that first slide. This is the traditional gap slide that compares this financial plan and the preliminary budget to the November plan. It shows the starting point, which did have gaps in 2017, and then the out-year gaps in 18, 19, and 20. It recognizes revenue growth that we have seen since November and in the entire fiscal year. This is the major change. There really was not a significant change in November on the tax revenue piece. This is consistent with what monitors have put out. So we've recognized that gain. However, it's still a fairly cautious forecast in the out years, recognizing the concerns that the mayor raised about the troubled waters. The expense side of this, no, stay here. Go back. Let's go back. No. Thank you. We're going to stay here. On the expense side, it shows the agency changes both in 16 at $657 million and in 17, $740 million. The savings that the mayor identified of $804 million, $207 million in the $270 million in 17, which are largely the result of debt savings and reestimates and other savings programs. The next line is the labor reserve, which is the recognition of the $15 that the mayor also identified. Below that is the pension cost, which we said are approximately $600 million a year. And as you can see, those are effectively $600 million a year through the financial plan, and will be paid off $600 million a year over the next 15 years. The general reserve, as is the custom, gets reduced in the preliminary budget and in the executive budget. And I'll show you on the next table. However, we're at historic highs on the general reserve, and we're at $1 billion of a general reserve when the traditional reserve was $300 million. The following line is the first ever capital stabilization reserve of $500 million. And that is also being brought down, and then for the first time being continued in the fiscal year 17. A reestimate of prior year expenses and receivables. This is a standard practice that's occurred in the city, about $400 million, a reconciliation of past payables and receivables. And that leaves us, most importantly, with a balanced budget in the current fiscal year and a balanced budget in 2017. And then out-year gaps that, as the mayor identified, are manageable and consistent with the gaps that we had going in. Now to the next slide. So this slide, I'll be very quick here. This is city funds, and the one that will follow in a minute will be all funds on the city funds. We've actually shown this for the first time. At the very bottom of it, just to again recognize, it talks about the general reserve and the capital stabilization reserve, and identifies that we're at $1 billion in each year of the out year of the fund, and it gives total city fund spending. And then on the final slide, which I'll conclude with, let's move one more slide. This is the all fund slide, which includes really dramatic increases in federal aid that the mayor also identified, which we've been seeing over the past several years, that are a direct result of both FEMA and HUD spending on Sandy recovery. And the bottom line, which also has the general reserve. With that, I will turn it back over to the mayor, and we will be doing a technical briefing at the end of this as well.
Yes, so again, we'll take a host of questions. If they get particularly detailed or technical, we'll save that for the technical briefing. After, let's lift off on our questions. Courtney.
Mr. Mayor, is there a PEG program? Some people, some council members, 24 of them to be exact, have said that you need to save more, you need to cut, which is surprising coming from the council. We normally don't hear that argument. So are there cuts in this budget? If so, how much? And if not, why?
So look, there's savings for sure in this budget. There are some things that we chose not to continue. We talked last year about the summer after-school program, which is something we had thought was a good thing, but wasn't necessarily the priority we could devote to, so that's not in here. But in terms of a potential program, a PEG program, I should say, that's something we are looking at seriously, and that's something that will be a relevant discussion leading up to the executive budget. We didn't feel that it was appropriate for this point, but we are seriously considering it for the executive budget.
Describe what those savings are in more detail. You said there are savings.
On the chart, once again, it's over $1 billion, and we can go into more detail. I mean, the mayor identified one. There are significant, about $400 million in debt financing savings, different interest rate assumptions. There are other savings in there. I'm happy to, we're happy to go through them. For example, we end the epidemic, with significant benefits from moving people out of shelters into permanent housing, and those actually have serious savings that roughly will account to about $20 million.
Laura.
Mr. Mayor, or for Dean, I don't know, how much of the savings was driven by agency savings?
About half of it is agency, and half of it is debt service. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, you've announced a number of homelessness programs. It looks like the DHS numbers are not changing too much, but it looks like HRA from last year's effective budget has increased about $400 million. Is that right? And are most of these programs going to be run through HRA?
I think it's a mix in terms of what we've done in the last budget and this. But Dean, you can speak to.
I'll have to clarify. I don't see $400 million. There are significant increases in both DHS and HRA. It's one of these significant areas, and it's about $100 million in this presentation, but we'll get you, since the beginning of the administration for this year, it's about $300 million. So some of that may actually be Medicaid money, so because HRA is where the Medicaid dollars flow through, so we'll have to go into more detail for you on that.
Mayor, there's significant money in this budget for Rikers Island. The city's already invested a lot
Yep.
in these plans going forward. I'm wondering sort of what kind of return on that investment you feel you've seen before, and I know you'll be hiring a lot of new officers. Wondering where the conversation is on building a new training academy.
So a few different points there. Yes, we are seeing a return on our investment because in the facilities where we're implementing the new strategies, violence has gone down markedly. So we are very hopeful there. We see a lot of new leadership emerging from the staff. We are very excited to bring in a new generation of officers who have been trained in a much different way, screened in a much different way. Look, it would have been better for the city of New York for these issues to have been caught, 5 and 10 years ago and dealt with more foundationally, but I'm convinced that these initiatives are working. It's going to take time. This is one where I'm not promising people a rose garden. This is a tough, tough situation. But there is clearly progress, and we're going to keep investing until we get it right. In terms of the training academy, that is something we intend to resolve shortly. It certainly has to be resolved. We want a good facility, but there's still a few more decisions that have to be clarified before we can make our final determination. I think that's something exec, right? We expect to be resolved by the exec.
On uncertainty regarding the state budget, it seems like we've been in a bit of a roller coaster where after the governor's speech, it looked like the city was going to be hit with $800 million in extra payments for Medicaid and CUNY. Now you're saying we don't actually need to worry about that. You've been assured that that's not going to.
I'm not saying we don't have to worry about it. I'm saying I am taking the governor at his word, and I will hold him to that word. And I think a lot of other people, the council, and I think legislators, I think a lot of people all over the city feel the same way. He said he wants to find a collaborative process to find reforms and savings. That's something we would always be happy to engage in. But we cannot accept a cut that would undermine the education of our young people or the health care of our people. So, we'll work in good faith, and we'll work from the assumption, given what he said, that we do not have to lay out what almost $1 billion in cuts would mean for the people in New York City. If anything changes, we'll certainly speak to it.
Has he given you any personal assurances, or you're just basing that on his public?
No, I've spoken to him several times about it, and you've heard his public assurances. So again, I'll take him at his word. Like any other of our partners in different levels of government, we'll hold them to their word. Yes.
The state budget proposal also includes another element that would impact New York City that the governor didn't specifically talk about last week. The state would take the savings that the city achieved from a refinancing of its debt from the bankruptcy decades ago. Are you assuming that that is not going to happen?
No, that's something, look, we need to have a lot more conversation with the state about that. We do not like the look of that, and we don't think it's appropriate, but it's something we need to talk through. There may be a solution, as we've found a potential solution here on these other things. There may be a solution there as well. So we'll continue conversations with the state, and I'll certainly have more to say when we get to our budget testimony.
Has the governor made the same promise that he made publicly?
No, to be fair, I have not spoken to him about that issue per se, and I look forward to doing so.
Were you aware of it?
I was aware of many things in the budget at the time of its publication, and not before. So as we've been very clear about the fact that we, like other years, have been going through the state budget with a fine-tooth comb, finding some areas that were not evident at first, finding some areas where we still need substantial answers. So we're doing this in stages. We've got 10 weeks, thankfully, until the final decisions. But that's an area, again, where I'm looking forward to talking to them directly. Let me give other people a chance. Go ahead.
Maybe this is being overly simplistic, but you have all the increased expenditures and investments. Is there anything on the other side of the ledger, maybe tax increases?
No, I'm glad you asked. No, I've been very committed since I became mayor to not raising property taxes. We are not raising property taxes again. We are protecting against an increase in property taxes by the way we're handling our fiscal dynamic, whether it's the labor contracts, the healthcare savings, you name it, all the things we're doing for fiscal discipline. And obviously by having strong reserves, we're protecting against future property tax increases. So this is a real bottom line for me. I want to do everything I can to avoid my fellow New Yorkers having to experience a property tax increase. Yes.
You're investing a lot more in the public health care system, but Staten Island doesn't have a public hospital, and local elected officials have been pushing the city to invest in Rumsey's emergency room, for example, because of the aid on the borough. Is that something that you're going to consider going forward? Have you thought about how the healthcare system on Staten Island?
I think we're going to have to wrap that into this bigger discussion. Clearly, I'm aware of the disparity, and I'm concerned about it and have been. Dr. Raju happens to live on Staten Island, so he understands it personally and directly. This is a longstanding issue that we have to do something to address. That being said, we're also going to have to do a lot of other big changes at the same time. So an atmosphere where the finances of HRC are deeply stressed is a tough time to try and address historic inequities, but there may be a way to creatively do both at once, and we'll be looking for that. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, you warned of some economic risks facing the city during your preliminary budget presentation last year. How much more concerned are you about the risks you face this year, and are the reserves you've set aside enough?
I'm a lot more concerned than I was this time a year ago. Let's go over the facts. Someone will have to give me the exact moment when ISIS became an international front page nonstop issue, but a year ago we certainly didn't feel the effect of terror the same way we do today in terms of global consciousness and economic confidence. These movements in the stock market, obviously China, that's happened in the last year, but even some of what we've seen here at home. The slowdown in growth in some of the other leading economies was much more pronounced than what we were seeing a year ago. So there's a lot to be concerned about. And then let's also face it, we've tried to be honest about economic cycles. Each quote-unquote recovery, I always like to frame it that way because this has been a very questionable recovery, but each recovery has a time span. And we are at a very mature point in that time span compared to previous recoveries. We're well past the average point at which a recovery turns back to a recession. That alone should concern us. So yes, I'm saying I am more concerned than I was a year ago. Dave? Okay, I'm sorry.
Do you think the reserves that are set aside are sufficient given that level of concern?
I do, because they're the most substantial reserves the city's ever had, because they're coupled with a series of other actions. Again, if we were just talking about reserves in isolation, that'd be one thing, but we're not. We're talking about the continued healthcare savings. We're talking about the work we've done on the labor front. Again, we're going to be looking at the executive budget in terms of the question of agency savings. There's a lot of other moving parts to the equation. So I feel we have struck the right balance. The trick here is we have to protect against future dangers while continuing to build our economy and obviously addressing the quality of life and the needs of New Yorkers. When we build our economy, that brings in revenue, right? So I want to be clear. This is a very complicated equation. All that new growth in the tech sector, all that new tourist activity, all those new jobs are benefiting not only the city economy and the people of the city, but they're benefiting the coffers of the city and allowing us to be stronger against any potential downturn. So it is a balance that has to be struck, but we think these investments are right for maximizing our economic potential, and the reserves are very substantial. Now, again, I showed you a scenario for the Great Recession. That kind of hit would strain us particularly. That was worse than any other recession. That the only thing that was greater was the Great Depression itself. So again, we think $5 billion is a very healthy number given a typical, if you'll forgive the phrase, a typical economic downturn. Dave?
Related to that question, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way at all, but there's not a lot of drama in the budget, and I wonder if, in light of your concerns about the economy, the fact that the state budget was rather splashy with a lot of bells and whistles and things from Governor Cuomo, that you consciously, that boring is good.
Yeah, boring is good sometimes. Look, every year is different. State has a different reality than the city, obviously. We are very confident in what we put in place in the first 2 years. I think this is something you will see throughout 2016. A lot of what we're focused on is moving the agenda we started in the first 2 years, the affordable housing plan and equity and excellence agenda for our schools, et cetera. The big pieces in place, obviously, the neighborhood policing plan. I mean, we don't need to always have splashy new things when we feel that the choices we've made are going to have a huge impact if we implement them right. So this year is going to be a lot about implementing the pieces that are already underway and making sure they reach people. Vision Zero, obviously. We don't need a new Vision Zero. We need to take the one we have and keep deepening it. So the boring part is, and it's a good boring, I agree with your analogy or your assessment, lots of reserves, lots of fiscal caution. And what I'm saying to you, I have a witness in Dean Foulahan. I say variations of this essentially in every budget meeting we have. I am the naysayer in the room in the sense of always cautioning that we have to prepare for an economic downturn. And I believe that that is the right way to approach it. And that, God forbid that day comes, when we're able, therefore, because we laid in the reserves and we made a series of other tough choices to continue services to the people of the city, to keep our cops on the street and to keep providing schools, education in our schools and all the other things people need, and we avoid a property tax increase. That prudent strategy will pay off. That's the way I look at it. Henry.
You led off the presentation with this chart of the inequality of
Yep.
wealth, the current chart that showed that most of the income increases were going to the top 10%.
Yep.
But in spite of all this, you don't seem to be talking about a tax on the wealthiest anymore. Have you abandoned that belief that the wealthiest should be paying more taxes to support this kind of equality that you're advocating?
What do you take me for, sir? Henry. I think my belief structure is quite intact. I've spoken a lot about the need to make changes where they would be most valuable at the federal level. We have to have a more progressive taxation system. We need to implement the Buffett rule. We need to implement the, close the carried interest loophole. The candidate I'm supporting for president would do those things. And I think we're certainly going to look at the state picture in terms of what New York City needs in terms of revenue going forward. But I'm also realistic about the fact that this is not a year to pursue that particular initiative in Albany. We want to focus on something that we think is exceedingly important, and we think the number one tool for getting people out of poverty and addressing income inequality is raising the wage to $15 an hour. That has a real chance of passage in Albany in the next 6 months. That's what we're going to focus on. Other opportunities we will leave to the future. Mara.
Mr. Mayor, the comptroller has been outspoken about his belief that there should be about 12 to 18% of the city operating budget in the reserves. Moody's suggests 15 to 30s, putting aside the fact that they have rated the city very highly. I'm just wondering, I know that reserves are at an all-time high, but in terms of the percentage of the budget, you say yourself in this document that the city blew through $7 billion in under 2 years. So how confident are you that we have enough?
Again, based on what we know today, I'm confident. We'll always keep looking at the situation. But I'm confident that this is the right figure for what we have now. Why? Because we have to strike a balance. I've had this conversation with the comptroller. I met with him earlier today. I respect his position. I think we have some real differences on how we're counting what our surplus is. But I do respect that impulse. Every comptroller should feel some of that. I think you make a very fine point that rating agencies always like more reserves, but they still think we're doing very well. And they appreciate the labor, fiscal responsibility of our labor deals. They appreciate the health care savings. They appreciate a lot of the things we've been doing. So this is about the balance point, right? $5 billion almost in reserves is a very, very healthy number by any measure. The investments we're making, think about what people care about in the city. They clearly want to see the economy keep growing. They want more jobs and better paying jobs. They want better schools. They want to continue progress on public safety. They want us to address the homelessness problem in a way that has not been addressed before. All of these pieces require investment. They all also make us stronger for the long term, more able to weather any storm that comes. And again, they bring in a lot of revenue ultimately, because if we're a place that keeps growing, that means a lot more revenue. Every additional job we create, all the additional investment coming in from around the world brings in revenue. So I would argue this is the balance point. We're going to constantly look at it, though, and if we ever feel that we have to do more, we'll be ready. But today, we think this really is the balance point.
You keep saying that you've said in the past that property taxes aren't going up, but tax bills are going up and the levies
Right.
going up. So, I mean, it's a little frustrating.
Well, it depends on, obviously, the neighborhood, et cetera. Go on.
Yeah, but it's a little frustrating for homeowners to hear that you're saying that property taxes aren't going up when really they're seeing an increase.
I disagree that homeowners can't understand that difference, because I'm a homeowner, and I sure know when the property tax rate goes up. And the people of this city do not want their property tax rate to go up. It has gone up in the last decade or two a few times. I was there. People don't like it I understand why. Because most people are struggling to make ends meet. So the fact that we have said resolutely we are going to not let that property tax rate go up, I assure you, go talk to any homeowner and they will tell you they approve of that. Now, you're right if you say because of assessments and the changing values of real estate and other factors, people in many cases are having to pay more. I respect that and understand that. But we believe that we have to strike a balance in all things. And the investments we are making, for example, again, I think if you ask most homeowners, do you agree with the investment we've made to get 2,000 more cops on the street? I bet they'd say yes. Or to make our schools work not only better for our children, but so we can have the workforce we need in the future. I bet they'd say yes. So we believe this is the right way to do things. Invest and guard against the property tax rate increases that I think would cause real pain to lots of property owners and homeowners in the city.
Mr. Mayor, can you talk a little bit more about the necessity for the city to prop up health and hospitals? You know, how long do you anticipate that's going to need to happen, and how much do you anticipate?
We're going to come back with a plan again, combination. Essentially, this is about overall healthcare economics. You saw 3 major changes that happened because of, 2 of them really because of federal policy, 1 more because of state policy. But the sum total is, you know, a perfect storm of things hitting at once that have really buffeted health and hospitals. Before the executive budget, we will come back with a plan. Very strong analogy to what I said in terms of the housing authority. Boy, so housing authority does not have a simple road either. $17 billion in capital needs that are unmet. But the Next Gen NYCHA plan actually does address those over the long term and stabilizes the finances. We're going to do the same thing with health and hospitals. Dr. Raju has already started the process. He is a well-known reformer in terms of figuring out how to fix systems. And this is happening in public healthcare systems all over the country. We're going to have a very different approach, but we'll be bringing that back to you over the next couple of months. Gloria.
There was some criticism last year at the lack of after-school programs associated in the summer.
Yep.
You're cutting some of those. And
Yep.
Can you talk about that since that's such a big part of your overall education agenda?
I believe fundamentally in after school, but the thing that I've committed to, and we will be committed to for the long term, is after school during the school year for every middle school child. That is effectively a guaranteed right now in New York City. We have, in the course of the last 2 years, doubled the number of middle school kids approximately who are taking advantage of after school for free. And if more want it, they will get it. That's during the school year. That's where we think the most important impact can be made. The summer program is a very good thing. We just don't feel we can afford it at this point. We'll take another look going into the executive budget. But again, we admitted last year, you know, we did not handle it correctly, and we decided to fund it at the end because so much had already started down the road toward the summer. But this time, in the cool light of day, we're saying, no, we're not going to fund that. People should not assume it's coming. They should not prepare for it. If something changes in the exec, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Yes?
This is somewhat obliquely related to today's announcement.
Somewhat obliquely. Not just obliquely, but somewhat obliquely. Okay, let's see what we got.
30-degree angle. Anyways, my question is, how much is your administration estimated that your housing plan will increase city revenues, property tax revenues?
That's less somewhat oblique than I thought it would be. It's a great question. We have to get that. Yeah, we'll get that to you. Yes.
The governor did not account for the MTA capital plan in his budget. Does your budget account for it?
Well, we're committed to it. You want to speak to the mechanics of that?
Sure. The capital plan does and did have $657 million over the 5 years of the MTA capital plan. As a practical matter, the MTA capital plan has not been sent yet to the capital review. Sorry,
No, we were just consulting.
Sorry, the Capital Review Board for approval. It actually needs to go for approval before it can actually be executed by the MTA. So we're waiting for that. The additional money that the city put forward, the $600 million, is actually a cooperative arrangement with the MTA that has to be worked through. Those are joint economic, taking advantage of joint places that we both have some control over. And then the additional about $1.25 billion was to be consistent with what the state did, so we need to actually see exactly what those details are.
Emily?
Are you concerned that when you go up later this month to deliver testimony in response to the governor's budget, that legislators won't be as receptive to the city's requests because we have such a robust reserve?
Look, it's a fair question, but I think what I'm going to say incessantly, and by the way, I believe those who represent New York City understand this fully, and I think a lot of people who represent other places can relate to it in terms of their own localities. Certainly my colleague mayors around the state and I talk a lot about the fact that we know in a downturn, each city is going to be very vulnerable and have to deal with its own problems. So I would say intellectually, I think a lot of people will understand when I say this budget is based on reserves to protect against a downturn, because in that downturn we will be on our own. I think a lot of people will actually acknowledge that, either publicly or privately. The things we're going to talk about, I won't go into detail, but the things we're going to talk about, I think are perfectly fair concerns that folks in Albany will understand, are motivated by trying to serve 43% of the state's population. And, you know, the last 2 times there have been very productive conversations at those hearings, so I look forward to them. Yeah.
Education funding went up since your last preliminary budget, about $500 million in OTPS. Other than your new education initiatives you announced, do you know what else that is? And do you know how much the city is contributing beyond what the state is?
Dean will come in. I mean, obviously, pre-K did expand substantially. And the Equity and Excellence Plan is a very large and substantial plan that we think will help us to remake the school system anyway. And obviously the focus on the renewal schools, there's a whole host of things, but anything you want to add?
I mean, it is primarily all the initiatives the mayor has announced since the beginning of the administration. We can go through the details with you after this.
Do you know how much the city is contributing to the expansion of pre-K in fiscal 17?
We'll get you the exact number. Obviously, we're getting the exact same amount from the state.
Mr. Mayor, the new Staten Island ferry boat, is it more seaworthy? Is it faster, smaller, larger?
Just plain better, Rich. We'll get you. I mean, obviously, we're going to get a state-of-the-art boat. I don't know if did we get the data on the age of the 3 boats that are being replaced? Yes. Who's got that? This was a great discussion last night here in this room at about 11 p.m.
51 years old.
One of the boats being replaced is 51 years old.
One boat is 35 years old.
35 years old.
One boat is even 34.
34?
Yes.
34 years old. Okay, these boats have been around. So we're very proud of the fact there'll be new boats for all of them, and they are storm resistant. They'll be modeled after the JFK class. I don't know why I'm believing you're telling me the truth, but you know, I'm just going to let Anna have one draft choice here. Okay, yes.
So any idea?
Resistant. Thank you, Amy. Storm resistant. Would you please?
They'll be modeled after the JFK class.
After whom you want to name the new boat?
We are going to be thinking about that very, very soon, and we'll certainly have something to say on that soon. Yes.
Are there any plans to make cuts to HHC, given that the city is pumping $37 million?
Well, again, we're talking about restructuring. We're talking about, again, as we had to do with the Housing Authority, look at the whole thing and figure out long-term financial stability and viability. So we're going to come back with a very substantial plan, and it's premature to start to outline it until it's all done, but it's going to have to put health and hospitals on a strong footing for years and years to come in a substantially changed healthcare environment. You know, we now know many good things came out of the changes at the federal and state level. I want to be very clear. A lot of good came out of Obamacare. A lot of good came out of the Medicaid reforms, but some real unintended consequences too. We now have that picture, and we're going to have to adjust for a very different future.
Just following up, with the presidential election, do you expect some of these realities will change in relation to NYCHA and HHC, depending on who's in the White House?
Damn good question. This is why I've been doing what I've been doing for the last 2 years, trying to have some impact with my colleague mayors in particular on the entire national discussion on what the federal government should invest in. We have an opportunity to actually go at the heart of the matter in 2017 because it's too early to tell the outcome, but we all know we could have a president in the White House who wants to make investments in healthcare, in affordable housing, in mass transit, in infrastructure, in a way that has not been done previously or wasn't reachable previously. We all know we may have a new Senate and a new Senate Majority Leader. Oh, by the way, those 2 people could be New Yorkers. So that's extraordinary to begin with. But what we're finding, and I believe this, is that the dialogue on the ground is changing all the assumptions. The mayors of this country, a group I'm very honored to be among, have single-handedly in many cases moved the paid sick leave issue, minimum wage, what Seattle did on minimum wage, what so many places did on paid sick leave, really helped bring these issues to the fore. That's one piece of the puzzle. The Fight for 15 movement has changed entirely the discussion around minimum wage. So the point is, we have a chance to change the entire set of assumptions. In 2015, that moved very rapidly. I think you can see from the national debate, it's continuing to move in 2016. So what I'm going to try and do is do everything I can, as mayor of the biggest city in the country, to work with my fellow mayors and certainly to work with progressives all around the country so that when a new president comes in the door and possibly a new Senate leadership, we are positioned to make immediate changes that could really benefit New York City. And if we just on any of those areas, if we got some important changes on health care, it could make a big impact on health and hospitals. If we got support for affordable housing, it could make a very big impact on that $17 billion in capital needs at the Housing Authority. Certainly, we had some progress in the highway bill, but we could use so much more to fix our roads and bridges and mass transit. So that, to me, is the biggest X factor. It's not what more could happen with the city budget or the state budget. The big X factor for the people in New York City is what could change on the federal level. And boy, the early indicators are promising that 2017 could be a very, very different reality in our favor. Okay, last call. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, given HHC's finances, will this review consider, or restructuring considerations, consider closing or consolidating any hospitals or other facilities?
I don't see a scenario where we would close any hospitals. We'll certainly look at ways to maximize what we're doing. We might be able to put more than one function in a building and find ways to be more efficient and save cost. That certainly is, I think, one of the directions we'll be looking at. Obviously, I think Dr. Raju has made a focus on trying to make the services available more appealing in what's much more of a healthcare marketplace, so that more and more customers who have different kinds of insurance will want to take advantage of health and hospitals facilities. There'll be a lot to say on that, but certainly from what I know today, I did not see closures as part of that plan.
Do you have a doomsday plan in case those Medicaid and CUNY cuts actually hit the city's budget?
Well, again, I said we will, fight them by any means necessary, and I meant it. I believe we will prevail. But I also want to start by saying if the governor's put forward an opportunity for us to work out these issues in a productive, favorable way, that's what I think is going to happen. That's what I hope is going to happen. But if for any reason something goes wrong, we will have ways of fighting it. If you say, do we always have in the back of our mind different options? Of course we do. But this one, to me, on its face, is unacceptable, and I'm very confident we'll deal with it.
And just to follow up, have you identified any areas where you could find efficiencies?
Well, are you saying in general, or are you saying on CUNY and? We haven't had those discussions yet. This is something that happened last week. But again, Governor and I had a good talk about it, and our teams have certainly started to talk about a number of other areas, so we're going to figure out who the cast of characters is and sit down and start having those discussions.
Mr. Mayor, on reforming CUNY, do you agree, as the governor has said, that the central administration is bloated?
The governor has raised the point that there might be ways to be more efficient. I think that's a perfectly fair concern. I'm not going to offer an opinion on the current state of affairs as much as say most bureaucracies can find savings and efficiencies. And it's certainly a worthy approach. We just went through an extensive approach with the Housing Authority where we found a lot of ways to save and restructure. So that's a very valid discussion we'll go through with them. But I'm not going to start with an assumption. I want to see where it takes us. Last question. Anyone going once? Going twice? Oh.
Kind of the obverse of Jeff's question.
Again?
Kind of the obverse of Jeff's question. In the event, how is city bracing for the possibility that in a year from right now, we could have a Republican president, a Republican Senate, and a Republican House of Representatives, and that more cuts from the federal government could be forthcoming?
Look, just as we're not booking in what I would regard as the positive, you don't see me saying, here's the budget. It assumes Hillary Clinton is president and Chuck Schumer is the Senate Majority Leader, right? We're not doing that. We'd love to, but we're not doing that. We're not also assuming the opposite. This budget is sort of neutral on the question of where Washington will go. If we end up with a leadership in Washington that's against the interest of New York City and wants to cut further investments in cities, We're going to have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But, you know, there will be time, obviously. A new administration comes in January 20th. The budget is October. You know, there would be plenty of time to make some adjustments. We're letting that sort itself out. We're taking care of our own approach here. Thank you, everyone.
There's going to be a pen